You have taken the test, probably more than once. You have read that you are rare, intuitive, idealistic, private, and prone to absorbing other people's emotions. You have nodded at the descriptions, felt a flicker of recognition, perhaps even relief. And yet something in you knows that these labels, however accurate, do not touch the thing itself. They describe the surface of your experience the way a map represents a landscape, useful, incomplete, unable to capture what it actually feels like to stand in the territory. What if the problem is not that you have not found the right personality framework? What if the problem is that personality psychology was never designed to hold what you are? Consider for a moment where these frameworks came from. The MBTI emerged in the 1940s, developed by a mother and daughter who wanted to help women entering the workforce find suitable jobs. It was practical. It was categorical. It was built for sorting, for matching, for placing people into roles that fit their tendencies. There is nothing wrong with this, but notice what it assumes. It assumes that the goal of understanding personality is utility. It assumes that knowing your type helps you function better in the world as it is. It assumes beneath everything that you are a problem to be optimized. Myth assumes something entirely different. Myth does not ask what role you should play in the economy. Myth asks what pattern your soul is living out. Myth does not sort you into categories. Myth recognizes you as a character in a story that has been told for thousands of years, a story that transcends your individual circumstances and connects you to everyone who has ever carried the same burden, seen with the same eyes, felt the same impossible longing for a home that does not exist in any geography. When you read that INFJs are rare, personality psychology is giving you a statistic. When myth speaks of the seer, the one cursed to perceive what others cannot, the one whose warnings go unheeded, the one who watches the village walk toward disaster whilst knowing exactly how the story ends, it is giving you something else entirely. It is giving you ancestry. It is telling you that your particular form of suffering has a lineage, that you are not a statistical anomaly, but the latest incarnation of an archetype that has appeared in every culture, every era, every mythology humans have ever created. This is not a minor distinction. This is the difference between being told you are different and being told you belong to something ancient. The personality literature indicates that INFJs experience a phenomenon called introverted intuition. It will describe this as a cognitive function, a way of processing information that synthesizes patterns below conscious awareness and arrives at conclusions that seem to come from nowhere. This is accurate, but accuracy is not the same as truth. The truth of introverted intuition is not captured in cognitive science. The truth is that you know things you should not know. The truth is that you have watched relationships crumble months before the first visible crack appeared, that you have sensed the shape of someone's wound before they spoke a word about it, that you have felt the ending of things whilst everyone around you was still celebrating the beginning. The truth is that this knowing is not a skill you developed or a talent you cultivated. It arrived with you. It is woven into the fabric of how you perceive reality itself. And no personality test has ever explained why it feels less like a cognitive function and more like a curse you did not ask to carry. Myth explains it. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo, who then cursed her so that no one would ever believe her predictions. She saw Troy's destruction with perfect clarity. She warned everyone who would listen, and she was dismissed as mad, dramatic, hysterical. She watched the city burn exactly as she had foreseen, surrounded by people who would not see until it was too late to matter. If you have ever known that a relationship was toxic before anyone else could see it, if you have ever sensed that a decision would lead to disaster and been unable to make anyone understand why, if you have ever felt the exhausting weight of watching people you love walk toward cliffs you mapped months ago, then you are not experiencing a cognitive function. You are living Cassandra's story. You are carrying the seer's inheritance, and that inheritance comes with a specific form of loneliness, that no personality description has ever adequately named: the loneliness of knowing. The loneliness of seeing clearly in a world that mistakes your clarity for pessimism, your warnings for negativity, your depth for overthinking. Personality psychology calls this pattern recognition. Myth calls it what it is: a gift that wounds, a sight that isolates, a knowing that separates you from the very people you are trying to protect. But here is where myth offers something that personality psychology cannot. It does not merely name your experience. It contextualizes your suffering. It places your particular struggles within a framework that has meaning, that has purpose, that transforms random pain into participation in something larger than yourself. Consider the archetype of the wounded healer. In Greek mythology, this is Chiron, the centaur who was struck by a poisoned arrow and could never heal his own wound, despite being the greatest healer of his age. He trained Asclepius, the god of medicine. He taught heroes how to survive. And every day he lived with a wound that would not close. Suffering was not incidental to his gift. It was the source of it. He could heal others precisely because he understood what it meant to carry something that could not be fixed. Personality psychology will tell you that INFJs are natural helpers, that you are drawn to supporting others, and that you absorb emotions and often neglect your own needs. This is observation without interpretation. What myth adds is the why. You are not merely inclined toward helping, you are living out an ancient pattern in which the wound and the gift are the same. Every INFJ I have ever encountered carries something. A childhood that required too much understanding too soon. A sensitivity that was punished rather than protected. An early encounter with darkness that taught you the geography of pain before you had language for it. And that wound, that thing you carry that sometimes feels like damage, is exactly what allows you to sit with someone else's suffering without flinching. You can hold space for pain because you have lived in that space. You can guide others through darkness because you know the terrain. This is not a personality trait, this is a mythic pattern. And understanding it as such changes everything about how you relate to your own history. Your wound is not a flaw to be fixed. It is an initiation you survived. The things that hurt you most have become the source of your capacity to help others. You are not broken and therefore helpful. You are Chiron. You are the healer whose healing does not extend to yourself, whose gift and grief are permanently intertwined. But myth, unlike personality psychology, does not offer only comfort. It offers shadow, and the shadow of the wounded healer is a territory that most INFJ content refuses to enter. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The same wound that gives you access to others' pain can become an identity you refuse to release. There are INFJs who have built their entire sense of self around being the helper, the healer, the one who understands. And when that identity is threatened, when someone does not need their help, when their insight is rejected, when they encounter a wound they cannot touch, something dark emerges. Resentment, a quiet fury that others do not appreciate the depth of what is being offered. A martyrdom that poisons from within. The wounded healer's shadow is the helper who keeps score, who gives in order to be needed, who cannot tolerate a world in which their suffering has not earned them moral authority. Personality psychology has no framework for this. It describes the positive traits and perhaps mentions burnout as a risk. Myth goes further. Myth says that every archetype contains its own corruption, that the gift, taken too far, becomes the curse, that the wound, if it becomes precious rather than integrated, will turn the healer into something darker, the one who helps in order to control, the one who understands in order to feel superior, the one whose compassion is a performance that masks a desperate need to be seen as good. If you have ever felt that dark current in yourself, myth does not shame you for it. Myth says that this is the shadow you must meet, that the wounded healer must eventually turn their attention inward, must allow their own wound to be witnessed rather than hidden behind service to others, must accept help rather than only giving it. This is the work. This is where the archetype either matures or calcifies into something that harms rather than heals. And there is another archetype woven through the INFJ experience that personality psychology barely touches: the exile, the one who does not belong, not rejected precisely, simply never quite at home anywhere. You have felt this, the sense that you are observing human interaction through glass, the experience of fitting in perfectly whilst belonging nowhere, the exhausting shape-shifting required to move through a world that was not built for how you perceive, how you feel, how you need to process existence. Personality tests will tell you that INFJs are rare, 2% of the population, perhaps less, and something is validating in that rarity. But the deeper truth is not statistical. The deeper truth is structural. You experience exile not because you are rare, but because your perception of reality is fundamentally different from that of most people. You live in a world of pattern and meaning, an emotional undercurrent. Most people live in a world of surface, task, and practical concern. Neither is wrong, but one is built for a world that does not yet exist. And that is you. The exile archetype carries a specific grief that personality frameworks cannot hold. It is the grief of perpetual translation, the grief of never being fully known because explaining yourself requires crossing a gulf that language cannot bridge, the grief of watching others connect easily whilst you calculate every interaction, perform every appropriate response, and wonder always if the person they are speaking to is real or simply the most functional mask you have learned to wear. Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. This is the exile's burden, not isolation by choice, but isolation by structure. Not preference for solitude, but a recognition that genuine connection requires someone who can see past all the masks to the strange and overwhelming creature beneath. And those people are rare, rarer perhaps than INFJs themselves. So where does this leave you? If myth understands you better than personality psychology, if the archetypes name what the tests merely describe, what do you do with this knowledge? The first thing is to stop pathologizing your experience. Every INFJ trait that personality content treats as a problem to be managed is, in mythic terms, a feature of the archetype itself. Your overwhelming crowds is not social anxiety to be overcome. It is the seer's sensitivity to emotional fields that others cannot perceive. Your difficulty with small talk is not a skill deficit. It is the exile's inability to pretend that surface interaction satisfies a soul built for depth. Your cycles of helping others and then disappearing to recover are not inconsistency. They are the wounded healer's necessary rhythm of giving and restoration. This does not mean you cannot work on yourself. It means that the work is not about fixing what is broken. The work is about integrating what is powerful, about learning to carry your gifts without being crushed by them, about developing the practical skills that allow you to live in a world that does not match your inner architecture, without betraying that architecture in the process. Myth offers something else that personality psychology does not, a sense of purpose. When you understand yourself as living out ancient patterns, your struggles stop being personal failures and become participation in something meaningful. The seer's isolation is not your private tragedy. It is a role that someone must play in every generation, the one who sees what is coming and holds that knowledge even when no one listens. The wounded healer's pain is not random suffering. It is an initiation that prepares you to help others navigate their own darkness. The exile's loneliness is not a flaw to be fixed, but a position on the edge of the village that allows you to see what those at the centre cannot. You are not a personality type. You are a pattern that has existed since humans began telling stories about themselves. And every generation, that pattern incarnates in people who feel exactly what you feel, who struggle with exactly what you struggle with, who wonder if they are broken, in exactly the way you wonder. You are not alone in your experience. You are not alone in your confusion. You are not even alone in your loneliness. Somewhere tonight, another seer is watching a relationship they cannot save. Another wounded healer is sitting with someone's grief whilst their own grief goes unwitnessed. Another exile is performing connection whilst feeling the glass between themselves and everyone they meet. This is your tribe. Not because a test sorted you into the same category, but because you are living the same story. And myth, unlike personality psychology, remembers that story. It has been telling it for thousands of years. It will continue telling it long after every personality framework has been replaced by something new. Jung understood this. He spent his life not cataloguing personality types, but exploring the archetypes that move through human consciousness like currents through water. He knew that the categories were useful, but that the patterns were true. And he knew that understanding yourself through those patterns was not intellectual entertainment. It was the work of becoming whole, of integrating the shadow, of recognizing that your gifts and your wounds are inseparable and that neither needs to be fixed, only held, only understood, only brought into conscious relationship with the rest of who you are. This is what myth offers that personality psychology cannot, not a description of your traits, but a story of your soul, not a category to belong to, but an archetype to live out consciously rather than blindly, not a set of strengths and weaknesses to optimize, but a pattern to honor, to wrestle with, to carry forward into whatever expression your particular life allows. You are not too sensitive, you are not too intense, you are not too much, too complicated, or too challenging to understand. You are living something ancient, and the loneliness you feel, the exhaustion of seeing too clearly, the strange position of fitting everywhere whilst belonging nowhere, these are not problems to be solved. They are the texture of a mythic inheritance that chose you, or that you chose, long before you had language to understand what you were agreeing to carry. If this video has named something you have carried in silence, if the mythic lens has offered something that personality descriptions have never quite reached, I would love to know which archetype felt most familiar. Which pattern did you recognize as your own? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to continue exploring the INFJ experience through this lens, through myth rather than mere psychology, subscribe to this channel. This is a place where your depth is not diagnosed, it is honored. Where your strangeness is not explained away, it is recognized as exactly what it has always been. The mark of someone living an ancient story in a modern world that has forgotten how to read it.